This is a presentation from the 2013 Cannabis World Summit. Please visit www.cannabisworldsummit.com for more great cannabis information, which is available to you completely for free. This information is being made available to you in part thanks to our sponsors. Please visit their websites to learn more about their excellent products and services. The following presentation is for informational purposes only. The opinions expressed are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of Leaves of Hope Productions, Inc. Please note that regardless of any statements expressed or implied in the following presentation, that we do not condone you breaking any laws. We are not providing any legal, medical, or financial advice of any kind. No comments about cannabis being a cure for any medical use, expressed or implied, is to be taken as a claim or guarantee. None of the statements have been verified by the FDA of the United States, Health Canada, or the governing organizations of your particular country. And again, this information is being provided for informational purposes only, and the participants exercise their freedom of speech discussing what they believe to be true. We do not guarantee the accuracy of any information provided. It is your responsibility to evaluate the information before you choose to make any use of it. Please consult with a doctor knowledgeable about cannabis prior to using cannabis, and or prior to discontinuing any medications you may be currently using. Please check with the laws of your country and region to determine whether you are legally permitted to use and or grow cannabis prior to any involvement with cannabis yourself. Even though we believe that cannabis ought to be legalized, we do not condone you violating any laws. Please review the legal disclaimers on the Cannabis World Summit website and only proceed to enjoy this presentation if you agree with all legal disclaimers, agree to hold the company, Leaves of Hope Productions, Inc., and the presenters harmless and are of legal age in your region. Thanks to Kevin MacLeod and Incompetech.com for the music used in this introduction.
So I'm here on the line with Fonda Betts, who's the founder of the Greenleaf Medical Clinic. She's also the CEO of the medicalmarijuana.ca company, and also she's involved with the Maple Reef plant products that they produce fertilizer for medical marijuana growers. And so we're going to be talking about a number of subjects today that are of interest to a wide number of people. But first of all, just want to mention that, of course, we're going to talk about the medical use of marijuana. We're going to talk about how cannabis can actually be helping people with various different types of physical conditions and ailments, and what it can do. We're also going to discuss how to prepare medical marijuana. So, of course, you can, ingest it in various different ways. You don't have to smoke it. There's vaporizers. There's ways that can produce healing oils as well. We'll discuss that as well. And, of course, one of the important things that I also invited Ms. Betts to do this interview with us today is particularly of importance to Canadians. If you are Canadian, I encourage you to stick through this interview all the way to the very end, because at the end of the call, we will actually be discussing the MMAR and the MMPR changes that's happening with the medical access to marijuana programs in Canada. So there's a lot of valuable information here that we're going to be sharing today. So definitely, if you're Canadian, stick through this. But if you're not Canadian, if you're American or anywhere else in the world, there's a lot of great information that's going to be starting up at the top of this call. And also today, I also asked Ms. Betts to discuss some of the spiritual significance of cannabis, because she, of course, she's a yoga practitioner, and she'll share some more information about what she does. She'll be sharing some breathworking techniques with us as well today, so that you can have some ideas of how you can begin to work with cannabis in a deeper, meaningful, mental, in a mindful way, as opposed to just using it medicinally or even recreationally. So there's another aspect that we'll be discussing. So there's quite an assortment of topics to be discussing. So Fonda, thank you so very much for agreeing to do this call with us today, and thank you very much for all the information that you're going to share.
Yeah, you're welcome. Absolutely.
Well, so let me just ask you, how did you get introduced to cannabis in the first place? I mean, obviously, there must have been some point that you've gotten introduced to cannabis in some way. Can you just share a little bit about how you got started and with cannabis, and then how that led all the way up to where you are now, where you're so involved in the medical marijuana industry?
So in my professional history, I founded a West Coast retail hydroponic store with my first husband And so with that, of course, that was back in 1995. And as the medical marijuana industry kind of progressed, patients were coming in and growers were coming in, and they were looking at having advice and buying supplies for their licensed medical marijuana facilities. So just to be able to give our customers more satisfaction and an understanding of kind of what they were doing, I had to really start focusing on medical marijuana and just kind of Health Canada policy. Wasn't really involved in that part of it. I was more into the legitimate side of agriculture and crops. And so, but from there we transitioned into starting a wholesale garden supply company named after my daughter, Allie. So I started a wholesale garden supply company in 1995. And then from there, I just saw that there was a really big market for gardening products for plants, not specific to cannabis, but for mainstream crops. So we started GrowTech manufacturing. And because of my retail knowledge and my association with the retail stores, those products migrated to the retail hydroponic stores. So, of course, the stores were getting more involved in medical marijuana as the Health Canada program was growing. And then I ended up in 2007 and damaged my wrist and still had nerve damage. So after going through physiotherapy and trying different techniques and different medications, my specialist, actually my neurologist, prescribed me medical marijuana. So my first prescription was for 6 grams a day. And I wasn't really a medical marijuana user. Yes, of course, I had used recreationally in the past, but it wasn't specific for medical purposes. And so for me, I just really found like great relief in using it and started really assessing patient needs and working with different people that I knew who had different ailments and were on other medications that the doctor had prescribed them. Everybody has family members who have been ill and who have been prescribed heavy-duty medications. And so it just kind of became a passion for me to really try to understand the whole plant physiology. And part of my education was I was really wanting to understand the herbology part of it. And so one of the things that I did was I started just taking courses on plants and herbology and how they affected the human body. And so that really became a passion of mine, and just started doing research on more of how the human body can stay in complete balance. And one of the things that I came across was the pH of the body. So the pH of our blood works at an optimum of a little bit above 7. And so with the way that we live our lives and the food that we eat, the majority of us are very acidic. So one of the research projects that I want to do on cannabis is a study on juicing cannabis to verify if it is alkaline or acidic for the human body, and at what rate it will bring the body back to its normal state of health.
So does cannabis actually help? So does cannabis actually help with alkalizing the body as well? And if so, can we actually? I'm just made a little written a note to bring that up again a little bit later on in the call.
Yeah, I haven't actually done a formal test, but I am assuming that it does because, it's a green matter. So most plants are alkaline, right? So, and the alkalinity also brings down the, what's that word? Sorry, I can't, I'm talking so fast here.
That's quite all right.
What's that word? Anyway, so I'm assuming that the cannabis plant, if you juice it, will bring down the acid value of the human body. But I haven't done that research yet.
Okay.
So, but that's
now, when you say juicing it, do you mean like putting it through a wheatgrass juicer or just putting it in a blender with some water so that you extract the juices from it, and then, of course, drinking the liquids from either process. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes, but I'm not talking about juicing the bud part. I'm just talking about juicing the leaf part.
Right, okay.
So there still has to be studies done into juicing, because I'm not sure just if a regular juicer would take out or extract all the compounds of the cannabis plant. Mm-hmm. So there has to be some scientific study done into juicing. But I just know that if I had cancer or I was quite ill with that type of an illness, that I would definitely juice, because I believe that it would be an alkaline juice. And that would actually be a very simple test. I just haven't had time to do it.
Okay, fair enough. Well, you know what?
So that's how I got involved in the whole cannabis part, was just by really understanding the plant. And because I had been involved in the whole retail side of it and developing products, mm-hmm. then I decided that, you know what, we need to try to develop products for patients to use in their medical marijuana gardens, because a lot of the gardening products out there, they're not for human consumption, like in the hydroponic stores. Like mm-hmm. they don't really know the products that they're actually using. So then came Maple Leaf Plant Products. I had actually sold GrowTech Manufacturing and Alley's Wholesale in 2007 due mm-hmm. to a shareholder dispute of my partner and I. So I was kind of semi-retired, just doing some natural things for myself, such as taking herbology courses, practicing yoga, just kind of figuring out the next steps for me in a career move, and also took that opportunity to spend some one-on-one time with my daughter, who was 12 at the time. Mm-hmm. So then I got a call from Chad Cleland, who was the director of medicalmarijuana.ca, and they were looking to start a fertilizer company. And so I guess they had been asking around to different companies and people who they knew, mm-hmm. and they were recommended to call Fonda Betts because I had experience in fertilizer manufacturing.
Okay.
So they called me and asked me if I would develop a fertilizer for them and give them a turnkey operation. So I agreed to take on that contract, and it was just a 6-month contract. I wasn't looking at getting into something on a full-time level. I was quite content raising my daughter, taking courses.
Now, how long ago was that 6-month contract?
That was in 2010. That was actually in 2010.
Okay, so you've obviously been quite successful, and obviously they've liked you, so they extended the contract.
Yeah, and it was great. And so what I did was I actually ended up buying into the company. So now I am part owner of medicalmarijuana.ca. Okay. And then from medicalmarijuana.ca, just getting involved in that aspect of it, one of the things that medicalmarijuana.ca was really good at was bridging the gap for patients for information. So a patient would contact us from our website. They'd want information on, oh my gosh, I need to have a doctor. I want cannabis, but my doctor will not subscribe cannabis to me. So we were working with a few different doctors across Canada. Mm-hmm. And so we would give recommendations for patients to other doctors and other clinics. And we were just finding that with that whole process, that patients were not being guided through the whole application process with Health Canada. Mm-hmm. So then we found an opening to start a medical marijuana clinic per se. And so we really took our time at finding a doctor that would work specifically with us, mm-hmm. and taking the leap of faith of doing our own medical clinic and having a full service clinic. So we can see patients all across Canada. Health Canada does allow us to do what we call Skype medication. Mm-hmm. So it's really great. So if somebody's in the hospital, they don't have to actually come into our clinic. Their family members can have a computer there for them, and the doctor can do a Skype consultation. Mm-hmm. And so because our clinic is in Abbotsford, we can have patients all across Canada. So if they're in Ontario, for example, we can Skype them in. If they're in Alberta, and then what we do with that is we make sure that we get the proper documentation from the patient. Mm-hmm. And so we have all the documentation sent to our clinic prior to the appointment with our doctor, Dr. Cynthia Shaw. Mm-hmm. And Dr. Shaw then does the consultation on a computer, signs the back of their photos, identifying that she is interviewing the actual person that they're saying they are. And then we work with the patient on getting their application sent to Health Canada and getting them approved. So we also help find them a grower, and so we work in conjunction with medicalmarijuana.ca if they're in need of finding a compassionate grower.
Okay.
So I'm the head of the grower program. So the growers actually have to write an online test. I talk to them on the phone. I validate them just to make sure that they know what they're talking about. They understand their obligations as a grower as well. Because when I took over the whole grower section of the medicalmarijuana.ca, I was really amazed at how many patients are just really taken advantage of from the grower perspective, where they're not getting their medication on time. Their medication is coming moldy.
Unfortunately, it's completely unregulated as well, so there's a lot of potential for abuse and scams.
Absolutely unregulated. And so that's where I kind of got involved, and I was amazed at how many growers were actually giving patients medication for free. And I know that there's patients that don't have a lot of money, but where do you get medication in Canada for free? And so I really worked at changing the mindset of the patient, too, to go, you know what, why do you feel that you should get medication for free? Your grower is doing you a service, doing something for you out of the kindness of their heart. I can't find you a grower that can give you medication for free. I just felt that was a really wrong business practice, and there was a lot of negative connotation. If a grower was giving patient medication for free, what was their motive?
Yeah, I've heard it. We'll perhaps discuss that a little bit later on as well, because there's been, of course, some motives where some growers have been, of course, abusing the system, and, of course, that's been coming out as well in the news.
Yeah, and you know what, that's going to happen possibly in every industry, but what we did was I find patient growers, but I make sure that the patient is able to afford something. And we usually base our price on $3 a gram so that the grower can break even. So if I have a patient, for example, who's a 3 gram a day patient, a 3 gram a day times that by 30 days in a month times by $3 a gram, the grower then is making $270 a month plus shipping costs to that patient.
Yeah, so about $300. So that's reasonable in line with a lot of other medications that they get at pharmacies.
And that plant count is 15 plants. So if there is a legitimate grower who wants to help that patient, then you know what, you can take that on. You're getting $300 a month for your prescription for the patient. And if they take on 4 patients per household, they're making $1,200 a month.
Now,
so
just out of curiosity,
they can make a little bit.
Now, this is just leading into another thing, just quick question, a quick deviation or tangent here. But, of course, there's been a number of growers that I've noticed in Canada in particular, but, of course, I'm sure many other places as well, that they're beginning to set up from being a compassion club to ultimately, once things become legalized, literally serving the medical community. They're literally setting themselves up as corporations, legitimate businesses, in order to become major growing organizations for providing the medicine legally, of course, legitimately, of course, we're talking about. So, are some of the growers that you're dealing with some of these people that are striving to, of course, or positioning themselves for that eventual date when this industry becomes completely legitimized, that they can become a completely legitimate organization for growing the medicine?
Okay, so let's back up a second. So,
yes.
So Health Canada, as we know them today with the MMAR program, they do not issue license to corporations. They issue license to individuals, okay? Because when Health Canada first developed this program, I think it was 2001, okay? They developed this program for compassionate Canadians to help sick people. So it was never Health Canada's intention to have growers look at it like a business opportunity, okay? So it was designed completely compassionate. And so that's why Health Canada gives licenses to individuals and not corporations. So now with the new plan, right, with the MMPR, okay, I understand that they still will have one person who is going to be responsible for the licensed facility. However, that person can work for the corporation. So it can be somewhat corporate, but one person has to be able to have all the responsibility because we are dealing with a narcotic.
Mm-hmm.
So if there are people out there who are setting up corporations, that's fine, but they won't get their license with Health Canada right now because Health Canada is still only issuing licenses to individuals. Once they open it up to their new proposed regulations, then yes, I'm under the assumption that corporations will be allowed. And I can only speak from our corporate standpoint because we are going to be applying to be a licensed commercial producer as well. And so right now we are in the process of sending in a research license to Health Canada. And so with that research license, it has to be in the director's name per se, but it's going to be linked to our company. So that way we can start doing some cannabis research.
I see, okay.
Prior to applying to be a licensed commercial producer.
I'm just going to put a little pause on this right now because, of course, I want to save the MMPR, MMAR conversation for a little bit later on. I have a number of questions, of course, that definitely want to get into some depth in there. But, of course, one of the I'll just mention this for what it's worth. Of course, one of the reasons why we're talking is because I approached your company because I was looking also to help get my MMAR because, of course, it's been ridiculously difficult to get this in Canada through regular means like going to your doctor or going to specialists. Most of the doctors are completely reluctant. However, we'll discuss that later on. But, of course, one of the benefits is that you're helping patients with accessing this the legal right to utilize this medicine legally. But, of course, my understanding is that you have this process where you do the Skype appointment with Dr. Shaw, and of course you see a number of different patients. And what I was hoping that you can do is discuss how can cannabis help people. Of course, we're quite well aware that cannabis can cure cancer and do a lot of other astounding things as well for a lot of serious illnesses. But if you could actually talk about some of the most common ailments that you actually see people applying for medical marijuana usage, and even some of the less common or perhaps less severe cases that can be benefited by cannabis use that perhaps most people can relate to, because all of us, let's just say, at some point in our lives experience aches and various different sorts. If you can just talk a little bit about I realize that I'm asking you multiple questions here, but first of all, what are some of the most common ailments that people come to you for your services, and how can cannabis help them?
Okay, so we see a lot of patients who have chronic pain. Okay, so chronic pain really isn't age specific. A lot of patients have back injuries, shoulder injuries. They've been in car accidents or multiple accidents or work-related injuries, or just over time the body breaks down and they have chronic problems. So when it comes to chronic pain, if somebody's in pain all the time, they just really can't be themselves, and it causes other problems in their life. They can't sleep. So then a secondary ailment arises where now they have insomnia due to their primary condition of chronic pain. Then because they have insomnia, oh my God, now they're depressed because not only do they have pain, but they can't sleep because of their pain. And because they're not sleeping, now they have depression. So there are some negative drawbacks to other pharmaceutical drugs, and I'll use like Tylenol 3s, for example. Tylenol 3s are widely prescribed, but what happens is it causes constipation, right? So people are like, oh my gosh, so they take that, then they have to take something else on top of that. So cannabis actually gives them, they get their pain relief, right, which is great. They don't get constipated from cannabis, and it's just a different way of medicating. So the doctor, for example, who gives the prescription for the cannabis, they don't have to agree that the patient should or shouldn't use cannabis. They're taking the patient's word and looking at the other doctor's reports that the patient has tried other medications and maybe those medications aren't serving the patient well. So now the patient wants to try alternative medication. So the patient says, you know what, I've tried these things. I don't feel good. Yes, I'm sleeping better, but I'm groggy in the day. So I want to try cannabis. I want to see what kind of relief that gives me. And we know that there is medical documentation and studies done that cannabis does help nausea. So if somebody has cancer and they're on chemotherapy, they get nauseous, right? They can take cannabis, and that will help them with their nausea. Same with HIV patients who are on medication. Patients who have IBS or Crohn's disease, it gives them an appetite. They get some of their life back. People can sleep great on the product as well. So cannabis, though, is very specific to each person. And because cannabis comes in many different varieties and many different strengths, it does pose a challenge, too, for some patients. You know, we see new patients who come into our clinic, and, you know, it might be the elderly person who's even 70 or 80 years old who says, you know what, I have arthritis so bad that my daughter said that I should come and check out cannabis, but they've never tried it before. So that makes it a little bit challenging, because then we work with the patient and we kind of get them understanding it and starting slow. You know, new patients definitely have to start slow on it, because everybody reacts differently. And if somebody has a sativa, which is more of an upper, right, they may react differently than an indica, which is more of a downer. So it's kind of working with that patient and finding the right type of medication for them as well, right, and also the right strength. So there's super strains out there that have super high THC contents, but we're finding that, you know, there are a lot of patients now that are looking for what I'll term as a designer strain, because that strain doesn't have a lot of THC in it, but it has a lot of CBD, and that will give them the anti-inflammatory properties, but not give them the psychoactive THC effect. So very low in THC, but very high in CBD.
Now, also, you spoke earlier about juicing cannabis, and my understanding, from what I understand from that, is that because, of course, THC in the plant is actually in a form called THCA, which needs to be decarboxylated by heat.
Yes.
Okay, so obviously you know where I'm going with this question, so we want to...
Yeah, totally.
Go ahead.
But the problem with Health Canada is that Health Canada allows the doctor to write the prescription for dried cannabis. So we have patients, like our patient will not sign, our clinic will not sign patients into the Health Canada program for more than 10 grams a day. That's our corporate policy. And what that does is that really keeps our clinic safe from the drug dealers, for example, and it keeps our doctor protected too. Not that there's patients that don't require more, but we're just not willing to take that chance of putting our doctor in scrutiny by Health Canada or other physicians. And we want to make sure that the patients that we have aren't focused on the higher plant count so that they have more excess cannabis to sell to the black market. So we don't sign patients in for more than 10 grams a day. So, but with the juicing, Health Canada doesn't say, okay, to the doctor, you can write the prescription for, let's say, 20 grams a day, because we know that the patient needs 98 plants because they want to take those leaves off those plants for juicing. Health Canada's recommendation is 1 to 3 grams of dried cannabis only. So it really puts the doctor in a bit of a situation, because they're signing a declaration to Health Canada that the patient wants to, or that the patient has tried other means of medication and now they want to try cannabis, but she can only prescribe for dried cannabis. So under Health Canada's regulations, you can't prescribe for leaf. You're prescribing just for the bud itself. So
I see. I never consider that conundrum there, but I see what you're saying. So essentially, they're prescribing something different in order to get access to a different medication. So essentially, there's a distinction between the buds and the fan leaves. So they're getting a prescription for the buds in order to have access to the fan leaves. But
Right.
Okay, interesting. All right.
And so Health Canada says, as a physician, you're signing the patient in to be federally exempted to have dried cannabis. They aren't being signed in to have oil. They aren't being signed in to have byproducts. It's specific for dried cannabis. There's no resins in there. It's just for bud matter.
Now, we're going to be also talking later on about different preparations of cannabis. Of course, you just implied oils as well, because, of course, in Canada we have very specific laws that you can only utilize dry bud. And,
right. And so, yes. And so I was at a meeting with Health Canada, would have been not this past February, but the February before that. And we kind of brought that up, right, and said, well, there's patients out there who are in need of oils because that works better. They want to bake with it because they don't want to ingest it. They want to make different byproducts with it. And the lady from Health Canada said, at this point, we're not policing patients. We're policing growers. So if I'm a grower, for example, and I have a patient who's a 10 gram a day,
okay,
I have to supply that patient 300 grams a month, okay?
Okay.
So if I give that patient a byproduct, that's illegal to Health Canada. But if I give that patient their 300 grams, then I'm federally exempt. That patient then can do what they want with the product. So if that patient decides to cook it and bake with it and make oils, Health Canada isn't policing the patient. Health Canada's concern is about the grower.
Actually, I'm kind of glad you said that because as a Canadian, now I realize that some of you listening to this might not find this particularly relevant, but we'll just be short on this part. Of course, my understanding is the laws. Well, there was a court case recently, and I'm not sure what the effective date is when you're allowed to officially be producing oils, because there was a 1 year. Of course, the court case was one. I'm just trying to remember the name of the court case versus somebody. But anyways. It was out in BC where it was a charge.
That was
about
the Compassion Club, right?
It was Compassion.
Yeah, that was the Compassion Club. Yeah, that was the Compassion Club on Vancouver
I'll be able
Island.
to find the information, but of course it would take me more than a few minutes, so I'm not going to do this during the call. But you know what I'm talking about. So, of course, there was a court case that was won in Canada where basically cookies and producing oils and medicinal edibles is now allowed. Of course, that court case was won. However, the Crown asked for a year before that law were to take in effect. I can't remember the effective date, but that's going to be coming up fairly soon, this year at some point. But of course, for Canadians, the reason why this is relevant and why I'm actually talking about this is because the laws in Canada are so strict that officially, if you take dry bud and produce any kind of oil, even if it's just coconut or butter, I'm not even talking about explosive things like using butane extraction techniques, but even just using something like butter, the laws are actually worse. And I use this sensationalistically that it's actually better to be a sexual offender with molesting children than it is to be doing something along those lines. And it's absolutely crazy, but the laws are such that in Canada that you can go to jail for an exceptional long time if you're caught doing stuff like that, especially since last year when Harper's new laws took in effect. But anyhow, that's not going to get into...
But it's interesting, though, because as a patient, like, I have my own license, so...
Yes.
So for me, right, like I do make my own byproducts. And so, I'll make like an olive oil infused cannabis. Even sometimes at night I'll heat up some milk and just put some ground cannabis in there. Mm-hmm. One of the mistakes that patients make is that they don't understand that to get the full effects of cannabis, they have to have it in a fat content. So if they're we have patients coming into our clinic saying, oh, I want a prescription, I'm using 20 grams a day, and I'm drinking just a tea. And after the doctor speaks with that patient, she starts to understand that they're just pouring hot water over the cannabis leaves. Well, like she said, you may as well be taping a Tylenol on your forehead, right? Like, it's not going to work for you. So it has to have some type of a fat content to be effective. So I definitely play around with things because I don't want to smoke it, right? I'm quite healthy. I believe in, treating my body good and having healthy lungs. And so definitely vaporization is a definite key. And baking with it and using it in your everyday products, right? Like make a cannabis butter, put it on your toast, put it in your peanut butter.
Well, one of the things that I've personally found to sort of somewhat stay within the laws, even though I'm technically not even an MMAR patient yet, it's still a works in process. But anyhow, that's another topic. Is of course decarboxylate the bud, grind it up, and then of course later on at sort of last minute, mix it with some fats and just quickly cook it and then consume it that way. And I find that actually has absolutely wonderful medicinal benefits. But for the main part, it is of course dry bud, which is legally allowed. So, of course, this is just something that needs to be observed in Canada. I'm sure in other countries people would just be happy to make their oils and have the convenience of just taking out a spoonful or a capsule of at their convenience. But nonetheless, in Canada, we need to be a little bit more mindful of it. But you're saying, of course, they're not policing the medical users.
No, they're not they're not policing the patient per se, right? It's that where Health Canada runs into issues is they're getting a lot of pressure from municipalities, from police departments, from RCMP, because you have these designated growers now who have gone out and they're making a business out of it, okay? And they're selling their excess product to compassion clubs, where their license is just to give their patient dried cannabis to their prescription amount. They're supposed to give them a 30-day supply, ship them once a month, and it was never intended to be going to compassion clubs, to be making all these byproducts, shipping your patient all these byproducts, right? So, like I just had a situation where I had a grower send product to a patient in Ontario. And the grower's been working with this patient for, I think, 2.5 years now and decided, well, I'm going to send the patient some oil, okay? So what happens is that the grower goes and makes the patient oil and then sends it to the patient. This one package, after all this 2.5 years' time, gets confiscated, okay? Canada Post turns it into the RCMP. Now, because there's oil in there, you've put that grower has put himself in a compromising situation because he's not supposed to be having oil in the package, right? So I don't know how that's going to work out legally for him, but he's supposed to be shipping only dried marijuana to the patient.
Right.
So...
Well, hopefully, ultimately, I look forward to the day when all this nonsense is behind us and, of course, it's been rescheduled, descheduled, legalized, or whatever's most appropriate so that we don't have these restrictions that are preventing people from using medical marijuana. But, of course, I'm glad that you have a business that will, of course, be able to continue on after a Greenleaf medical clinic might not necessarily, its model might shift after that legalization, but, of course, you have the company that helps with these growers as well.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see where we go with the clinic. Our clinic is a private clinic, and sometimes I do get flack because we charge fees for our services. But I really want to let patients know that it's not just that we have a doctor there, right? We have 2 full-time medical office assistants. I'm there, and then we have a part-time girl. So it's, and we have a lease, we have rent, we have bills like every other company. So we are not a not-for-profit company. We have to make money and so we charge patients a $50 fee to get their medical records from their physician. And sometimes that can take us, like, I'm still working on files from November where I'm still trying to get their medical records from their doctors. And so, right, I mean, that takes quite a while. Then what we do is once we get the medical records from the doctor, we have Dr. Shaw review the file to make sure that the patient qualifies, because the next step is either a $350 payment or a $415 payment. So we don't want to take people's money up front because we want to make sure that they qualify before we take their funds from them and make sure that they will get approved by Health Canada. So Dr. Shaw reviews the file, to make sure that they qualify. If they qualify, then we call them and we book them an appointment and tell them, okay, to move to the next step, it's going to cost you X amount of dollars. If you're a walk-in patient, it's $350. If you're a Skype patient, it's $420, and that's all taxes included. And with that, what they get is Dr. Shaw, our clinic pays her $150 per patient because she does review the files, works with them Skype, blah, blah, blah. We usually schedule about a half-an-hour appointment for her, but there's work that goes into the patient file before she even has her consultation with them, and then there's work after that, right? So she definitely worked hard for her $150. And then the clinic charges $165 because we just raised our prices. And with that, we have our girls there who are getting the forms from the patients, getting the pictures from the patients, doing follow-ups with the patient. We charge a courier fee of $21 to Health Canada, and the rest of that is taxes. So that's how we come up with our fee structure. And then we also make sure that we put one of us down at our office as an appointed representative for the patient, because sometimes Health Canada loses documentation, or something will be funny with the patient's paperwork and it's stalled. So that way, if the patient's sick, they can't deal with the paperwork, or the grower can't deal with the paperwork. Because one of the things with growers is they might be great at growing, but when it comes to paperwork, they absolutely suck. So we take that from them and we do the grower's paperwork. And so if there's a problem with the application, we can call Health Canada, say, I'm calling on behalf of patient X, we're the appointed representative. What's going on with the application, and how can we see it through? So that's a really good service to have for patients and growers, because if they don't have it, they go, well, I haven't heard from Health Canada, I don't know what to do, blah, 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 right?
Well, for what it's worth, first of all, I regret that I delayed for so long before actually contacting you. And just to touch on the points that you just raised, a number of people have, of course, surfed the web, looked at forums, and talked with other people. And of course, some people had mixed feelings about the fact that they had to pay for these services from you. And of course, now that you explain how these costs are, where these costs come from, and of course it's completely reasonable that you have overhead that you have to pay, you have employees that you have to pay, and of course there's things such as courier fees and all sorts of other fees that you have to be able to handle. So of course now it doesn't seem at all outrageous or in any way anything out of the norms. It's actually completely acceptable, and considering the service that you provide and the hand-holding that makes sure that everything is processed properly, I think it's completely worth it, especially having gone through the process myself of talking to doctors, and I know I've spoken with others as well who've been down the same road. Talking to doctors, it's a very uncomfortable process. Doctors are completely, unfortunately, ignorant about medical marijuana and cannabis and how it can actually be beneficial. They're scared of it, actually, to be quite honest with actually, I'm sure you're aware of that too. And so there's a lot of complications that patients have in order to access the medical marijuana program that Canada is providing. So by having your services, this expedites the process, makes sure everything's done correctly, and of course you have a lot more confidence in what you're doing rather than talking to doctors on your own. So I personally regret that I haven't contacted you, closer to 2 years ago. But anyhow, so I'll just say for what it's worth, any Canadians listening to this, if you still haven't got your medical marijuana access, and of course you are completely eligible for the program, you know that you've been trying to get it by going to doctors and just been encountering the roadblocks there, just go to the website. It's www.medicalmarijuana.ca, or you can also go to greenleafmc.ca, I believe it is. Correct me if I'm wrong there. And of course, or just click on the link that's going to be next to this recording as well, so that of course you can go directly there. There's plenty of information there for you to understand exactly what the processes are, to determine what's involved, so that you understand, of course, are you qualified? What do you need to provide? And all sorts of information. Now, I think we're saving this for the last, but anyhow, just the way the conversation's been weaving, I guess we might as well just deal with this now, and then we'll get to the other stuff a little bit later on. But do you have any words for people who are Canadians in particular, who are trying to get their MMARs, who've been encountering these roadblocks that I'm speaking of? Do you have any suggestions? Like how can you help them? Of course, you've already been talking about it, but now specifically mentioning to them, what should they do? What's the next step they should be doing?
Another thing that I could offer too is helping patients educate their doctors. And I think that it's not that doctors don't necessarily want patients to have access to medical marijuana. It's that doctors have not been educated about the Health Canada program. They're not sure what their role is with the patients either. So if there's any patients out there who can't afford our clinic, for example, who they think that they could get their doctor to sign them into the program, definitely have the doctor call our office. We do talk to doctors. Dr. Shaw is great at speaking with other physicians and letting them know how it can help certain conditions. So we also do that. But the main thing is talk to your doctor. And if there's any problems there, there's resources out there. Like we have on the medicalmarijuana.ca, I think we have tips on there on how to talk to your doctor about it. And it's challenging for patients because we've seen situations where if we get a patient's medical records, for example, our consent for release of medical information says Greenleaf Medical Clinic. We don't say it's for medical marijuana. However, there are doctors out there who do research. They can go onto our website. They can find out that, oh my gosh, it's for medical marijuana. So there are physicians who threaten to drop their patients if they go on medical marijuana. So I don't know how to solve that. I think that will be definitely solved over time. Once there is more research done into cannabis and how it can help sick patients with different medical conditions. There just is a lack of information out there. So as the whole medical marijuana community evolves, then I'm hoping that there will be a lot more research done into it. And there's some great resources out there. There's a really good website. It's called ccic.net, and they're just a group of really knowledgeable people.
What is it, ccic.net?
Yeah, ccic.net, and it's the Canadian Consortium for the Investigation of Cannabinoids. And they're just a wonderful group of people. And Mark Ware is the director, I believe, of the ccic.net. And he's a doctor himself, I believe, out of Montreal. I think he's from the University of McGill. So, yeah, just a really fabulous resource. There's information for physicians on that website as well. There's good information for patients, too. So definitely follow the ccic.net, too. And just it's all about education.
That's
so I don't know if that answers your question, but, yeah, for patients wanting to access it, right? The other thing, too, that Health Canada hasn't agreed to do, but it happens out there. And I can say that I definitely also refer patients sometimes to a compassion club because of the wait time for patients with Health Canada. If we have a sick patient who's terminal and they're dying and don't have much time, even though they've had their consultation with our doctor, they don't have 8 to 10 weeks to wait for Health Canada to give them their federal exemption. So I will recommend that they take their doctor's form and they go and buy medication from the Compassion Club in the interim.
I was talking to someone else who actually runs a Compassion Club. Actually, he's been interviewed for the summit as well. Now, from my understanding is, according to the regulations in Canada, just I can't remember there's actually on the government website. He actually pointed this out to me on the web during the interview. So we actually had this written and read out specifically that if you have the demonstration or the proof of a medical need, that you can actually have access to medical marijuana. So let me just ask you the question. Based on the way the laws are written, there's a little bit of an ambiguity there that if you actually have the proof that you need medical marijuana, you have, like, for example, a signed letter from your doctor or just some statements from your doctor saying that you have this condition, you can go to a medical or compassion club and they'll actually issue you some medical marijuana based on that evidence alone. Now,
yes, but they're operating illegally, though.
So they're doing it illegally, okay.
They are doing it illegally. Compassion clubs, and I need to say, and I tell patients this all the time too, because I don't want to be responsible if they're getting faulty medication. Compassion clubs are not sanctioned by Health Canada. And so compassion clubs definitely operate in the gray area. And they have the attitude, well, nothing's going to happen because I'm only selling to patients who are deserving. But the patients who are deserving have 3 supply options, and that's never changed. They're allowed to buy from Health Canada, they're allowed to grow their own, or they're allowed to have a designated grower. Nowhere does it say that they're allowed to go and buy from a compassion club. So I believe that compassion clubs can be charged with trafficking because they are operating illegally. Nobody has issued them a license to be selling cannabis. They have no restrictions on them. They have no control. There's no safety measures taken. And quite frankly, the health minister does not want retail outlets. And I mean, that's been made very clear. And so patients should be abiding by those 3 supply options. But, me being a compassionate person, and if somebody comes into my clinic and they're dying, it's just not good conscience for me not to refer them to a compassion club because I know that they can have access to medication. If compassion clubs were legal, then we would be selling cannabis directly out of our clinic, but they're not legal.
Right. So essentially this is an organization of people who firmly believe that they're doing the right thing, providing compassionate services to people who are in desperate need of it. As you're mentioning, someone who's dying, they don't have the months.
Well, that's a whole political comment, though. But that's a whole political comment because somebody's selling medication at $10 a gram. Are they compassionate? I don't know. Mm-hmm. Right. So that could be a whole political debate as well. Right. A compassionate Health Canada sells at $5 a gram. I know that their medication is subpar, but I think that growers selling medication to a sick Canadian for $15 a gram, which I've seen it out there, is a little bit ridiculous. And that's not a compassion club being compassionate.
Now, just out of curiosity, right. Of course, talking about the pricing of cannabis buds, so we're talking about the buds specifically, nicely trimmed and all dry. If this was legal, of course, there's a lot of people who keep on saying that if this was legal, it would become a commodity, much like other herbs they can get at health food stores, for example, and it'd be much priced accordingly. If this was a legal commodity, what do you think would be a sort of a fair market value for a gram of bud, more or less? Now, of course, there's a lot because, of course, if it was grown in sunshine, there wouldn't be the cost of the hydroponics and the lighting and everything like that. So I know that does raise the price.
I think that one of the things that I'm looking at is a grading system. So there should be definitely a grading system like they do with hothouse tomatoes, for example. So, bud is categorized as AAA, for example. So I definitely believe that there is a grading system that could be used for cannabis. I think that growers could also use the whole plant. I mean, there's benefit of the whole plant, not just the bud amount. So I think that there definitely should be a grading system and good quality bud. I mean, it definitely depends on what your cost is for that as well, right? But I don't think $5 to $8 or $9 a gram is unrealistic for good quality medication. But is it organic? How has it been tested? What types of screening has it gone through? Right. So for good, clean medication, absolutely, it should be a premium price. But once we have, let's just say marijuana was decriminalized, for example. The prices would absolutely go down because of supply and demand. So whenever there's more supply, prices go down. Higher demand, prices go up. So,
but of course, as you're implying, of course, there's all sorts of different quality issues. Is it sensimilla? What kind of growing conditions? So, of course, even the testing, as you implied, of course, is it high THC, low THC, CBD as well, and, of course, the flavors. Of course, there's a lot of factors. So, of course, you can have of course, there's Jamin Shively, who out in Washington State, you're probably familiar with him. He's the former Microsoft executive who's creating a national brand of fine, high-end cannabis. So I'm sure that you're sort of talking along the same lines. He's not talking about Mexican swag or something with that's fully seeded here. So of course, understanding that there's a lot of variables here, like even bottles of wine. You can get a cheap bottle of wine. You can get also a $200 bottle of wine. Of course, I'm talking about a recreational substance, but just it's loosely comparable just for analogy purposes.
Well, and different strains require different care and detail, right? Like a sativa strain, for example, is known to be taller and more spindly and a longer crop cycle.
Yeah, it takes 6 months or so for it to
well, yeah, it can just depend on the genetics of the plant, right? So
but obviously the longer the growth cycles, of course it can't necessarily be grown in Canada, and the higher the price, because of course it takes a longer time for it to be grown and nurtured as well. Okay, so of course we've been talking a little bit we've been a little bit all over the place here, but that's all right. Of course we've been discussing some fantastic things here, but specifically we talked a little bit about the physical ailments that cannabis can help with, and of course you mentioned that chronic pain is one of the most common situations that people come to your clinics looking for help with, and that actually makes a lot of sense. I really liked how you also said it earlier in the call that chronic pain leads to, of course, lack of sleep, which leads to, or insomnia, which leads to depression, and of course other side effects.
So many secondary conditions, for sure.
So for all these secondary conditions, and what's interesting is if you look at it, cannabis actually wonderfully assists with all of those as well. So you have the chronic pain. Can you just, before we leave that subject, just wanted to return back to it just so you can talk. So how does cannabis, to the best of your understanding, help with chronic pain, and how should people consider, now of course we're talking broadly, of course different people have different specific issues, but just on a broad level of context, how can people use cannabis to help with those issues that we talked about, the chronic pain and of course the side effect of the insomnia and the depression that ensues after that?
Okay, so the best way that I would explain that is, okay, so let's just say I'm working doing yoga therapeutics with somebody who has MS, for example, okay?
Okay.
And let's say that they're in pain, okay? So they have MS, so their joints are tight, but they also have chronic pain in their lower backs. So when somebody has chronic pain, I mean, you can do this yourself even when you're on the phone, just contract your back muscles because you're in pain, right? So when you're in pain, we walk a little bit tighter. We're more contracted, which means that we're using more muscle energy. So if you have low back pain, you're actually hugging in your muscle energy to where your back spasms are. Do you follow me?
Yes.
So one of the things that medication does, and oxys do the same, Percocets do the same, is they can lessen those muscle spasms and give the person more of an opening. So when you're taking cannabis, yes. So when you're taking cannabis, it does have a muscle relaxant effect, and once you stop contracting so heavily, right, just taking that muscle energy away from an injury causes a softness, which also causes you to feel a sense of release and better well-being. So you're more relaxed. And so it also goes to the pain element just from softening. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, actually it does, very much so.
So if I'm working with somebody with chronic pain, for example, they'll medicate because they can breathe better. Like when you're not so contracted, what happens? Your breath is steadier. You're actually starting to breathe deeper. You're lifting your heart up more, so you're opening your chest, and everything is more open in the human body, and you're more relaxed. So cannabis takes that tension off, because if somebody's constantly in pain and agony, they're grumpy, they're miserable, they can't think straight, they don't want to eat, they're like, I don't know if you've ever been in chronic pain, but I haven't. It's not a very nice place to be, right? So
that's the whole reason why I'm doing this whole cannabis summit, is because I understand chronic pain.
Oh my gosh! And so when I medicate, it just brings a softening. And because I am a yoga practitioner too, I can talk about the breath a little bit. Most people are very shallow breathers. Okay, so they just breathe in the top of their lung portion. Okay, so I don't know if there's a direct link to, like, sometimes people will get cancer in the upper lung or the middle lung or the lower lung. I don't know if there's a direct link to their breathing that determines where they get their cancer in their lung, for example. But it makes sense to me that if somebody was a smoker and they were a shallow breather, that they would get cancer in the top of their lung. If they were a deeper breather, they would get cancer in the lower part of their lung. And if they were kind of in between, it would get in the middle part of their lung. So where I'm going with this is, as people use cannabis to soften and release some of their muscle energy, it opens up their breath work, okay? And so along the middle of our bodies, we have what we call chakras, which are energy circuits, we'll say. And so in yoga, we try to do deep breathing when we're practicing our yoga postures. And so that breath is called the Ujjayi breath. So it's Ujjayi for Ujjayi. And breath is a form of pranayama, which is energy. So when you're doing the Ujjayi breath, it's more of a diaphragm breathing. So you want to bring your breath in through the lower abdomen first and go up from the lungs out the throat and back down. So, and you actually make sure that your count of breath in and out is the same duration, and you breathe through your nose. So once you're medicating and you're freer in the body, then you can actually take deeper breaths. And by taking those deeper breaths, you're actually accessing your different chakras or your meridians in your body. So the lower belly, for example, activates chakra 1 and 2. And as your breath rises up to the lower rib cage, you're activating chakras 3 and 4. And then it moves up to the chest and the back of the throat, which is activating chakras 5 and 6. So all of those things relate to the well-being of the person, their safety, their security, their willpower, their motivation, right, their speech. And so I find that if I'm working with a patient doing yoga therapeutics and they have just medicated, that I can get that patient to access those meridians deeper. And sometimes they've never even accessed them before, which is absolutely amazing, because the breath, we can be without food, we can be without water for a period of time, but can you ever be without breath? No, you can't. For more than
a minute or so.
Right. So when people start accessing the belly breathing and be continuous with their count of breath on the in and the out and doing it through their nose, then they get the blood is more full of oxygen. The body is more full of oxygen. And I'm amazed at how many people are restricted in breathing because of their chronic pain. That's my whole point. Chronic pain also gives them restricted breath. And with restricted breath, they can never operate to their full potential, because breath is directly linked to our soul. Without breath, there's nothing. That's a really deep
it's interesting, actually. Well, for our listeners, of course, we're talking about some esoteric subjects here, but of course, there's a lot of correlations as well. Remember, of course, the same system is also the meridian system that, of course, acupuncturists use, and of course, medical doctors are beginning to accept and have a vague understanding about that. Perhaps that's the best way to put it. So, of course, there's definitely a lot of understanding over thousands of years, thanks to the Ayurvedic, and of course the Indian cultures who brought a lot of this yoga and information to us. But of course, most of us are at least rudimentally aware of these, regardless if we're completely unfamiliar with the chakra systems or any esoteric topics. You all know that if you get upset, you feel a tightening in your solar plexus. If you feel the love and warmth of looking at a baby or a child, you feel it in your heart center. Perhaps you feel other emotions, and of course they tend to center in these areas that are, of course, considered to be energy centers of the body, where these emotions and various different attributes are housed, and of course that's the chakra system. So regardless of whether or not you believe in the body energy or not, you can definitely relate to the fact that you experience a lot of these sensations in these areas that are correlated to, of course, the chakras, and of course the breath that we're talking about here. As everything that Fonda is saying, when we are in pain, we tend to be shallow breathers. If we're in fear, what do? We restrict our breathing. We almost hardly breathe at all. So, of course, all of these things, and of course, when we're in a state of peace and wellness, what do? We naturally tend to take deeper breaths. So, of course, one of the things that I remember studying and learning about as well is that when in pain, just deep breathing, literally breathing in through your nose without any understanding of prana or yoga techniques or anything like that, without any esoteric knowledge, just the simple fact that if you take some deep breaths, that actually helps with pain, physical pain. If you're experiencing physical pain, taking some deep breaths, believe it or not, really does a lot to help. If you're experiencing anxiety or fears or other types of emotions, take some deep breaths. It's amazing what a few deep breaths do. So I'm just saying this, sorry, Fonda, for going off on a tangent here, but I just want to make sure that all of our listeners are... Thank you. I just want to make sure that everybody listening, we're not losing anybody here because we're touching onto something esoteric. I want to make this relevant to everybody. That yes, there's esoteric wisdom that's being shared here, but of course, this is something that we can all relate to, and this is beneficial for all of us, regardless of our philosophical beliefs or understandings. This is really just the mechanisms of the body that we're discussing here, and how we can actually use breath work to actually assist in these natural processes to make us feel better. So sorry for going off such a long tangent here, Fonda, but just wanted to make sure that this was...
No, and I can attest to the anxiety too, and we actually see a lot of patients with anxiety in our clinic, and one thing that a patient can do with anxiety is, so let's just say you're going to inhale, so you inhale from the belly for, like, let's just say a count of 4. You hold that breath at the top for 4 seconds if you can, like try to retain that breath. And then on your exhale, make it a little bit longer than your inhale, and that definitely helps with anxiety. So just keeping the inhale and your exhale always a little bit longer. So if you're ever in a situation where you're feeling anxious, just practice that, and you're really good to go.
In fact, I remember some years ago I went to a conference out in Scottsdale, Arizona for a health-related company there, and it was just amazing what the benefits there's actually 10 things that they were teaching us to do, one of which was drinking a lot of water. So we drank a lot of water during this conference, and it made us feel really good. Sleeping peacefully, of course, is another one of them. But breathing deeply, we were encouraged throughout the day to be mindful of just taking in deep breaths. And it's just amazing how such simple little things as, breathing deeply regularly, drinking lots of water regularly, getting plenty of sleep.
And the first thing that I do when I'm working with patients who have less mobility is, first thing you want to do is you want to deal with their pain, because people can't even focus or think straight or even focus on their breath if they're in pain. So meditating with cannabis does that for them. So medicate, get them to a place where, okay, they've had their medication, they're feeling okay, and then take them to the point of breath. So, and I find that it's amazing how many people are so restricted because of their pain or their anxiety or their depression or because they're not sleeping. It all layers on top of each other, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, Fonda, can you just maybe perhaps guide us through a very short little breathing exercise, perhaps, just like over the next 30 seconds to a minute, just so that people listening to this can get a sense of how to breathe properly and get the rejuvenation. And actually, literally, a minute from now, sense a positive effect. This is not just a placebo thing or you understand, in a minute, people will actually be feeling better. So do you mind just sharing this breathing exercise with us?
So what I would do is I would come to a comfortable seat, probably would be easier. So just, have a comfortable seat. Make sure that your sit bones are firmly rooted in the ground so that you're feeling safe. And, sometimes I do it even when I'm driving in my car, stop at a stoplight and do a quick breath work. So, make sure you're comfortable. When I'm doing breath work, I really recommend to patients to do it with their eyes closed. And the reason for that is because when your eyes are closed, we want you to kind of go in and look at your heart and just focus on your heart, right? So with your eyes closed, you're being forced to kind of go into the body a little bit deeper. So you go in, just take a few calming breaths, just your regular breathing. Try to breathe in through the nose and out through the nose. And just do that for a few rounds of breath. And then when you're ready, we're just going to we're going to inhale to a count of 4. Then we're going to retain our breath, which is hold it for a count of 4. We're going to exhale for a count of 4. And then we're going to hold it for a count of 4 and inhale and exhale. So we're always going to retain at the top for 4 count and at the bottom for 4 count. So let's take a few moments just to settle into that. Keep your eyes closed. Look in. On your next inhale to the count of 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold to the count of 4. 2, 3, 4. Exhale to the count of 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold to the count of 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Inhale, and just keep doing that in your own time. So we'll just stay here for a few moments. And Bobby, so when you're ready to release us, just let me know and I'll release us in a few minutes.
Perhaps why don't we just take a few moments, just do, say, 4 cycles of this breathing.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll be silent for a moment. There's nothing wrong with the recording, folks. We're both taking our breaths now. And so
I'll do it too. So when you're finished, keep your eyes closed. Bring your hands to heart center. Bring your hands to your mouth as a reminder to yourself to practice good speech. Bring your hands to your forehead as a reminder to follow your intuition. Take your hands back to your heart. Namaste.
Namaste.
There you go. So I hope everybody feels better from that. That's such a yummy breath, right?
I almost don't feel like getting up from this.
Yeah, nice. I know. Is it like it's pretty powerful. So once people, I tell people first get your pain under control because that's what we want. We don't want people walking around in pain. It's not necessary, right? And then get them into their breath, and just the transformation that people can have in their life is pretty incredible.
Well, you know what's pretty interesting, actually, just myself right now, I have a smile on my face. Now, I've been kind of smiling throughout the day, but it's definitely more pronounced at this moment. I feel a lot more peaceful. I feel a lot calmer. Even though it's just been very short, I almost feel like I've just had a touch of a meditation there. My mind is calmer. And then the reason why I'm vocalizing this is perhaps for the people who have just done this with us, what you should be noticing is, of course, these are subtle effects, but they're profound just the same. And just notice how different you feel now than you did a few moments ago before doing this breath exercise, and see how that affected if you were experiencing pain. Is it subjectively lower now? What was the number before? If we did that before, we didn't, of course, come up with SUDS or subjective number for pain levels, but you might notice that the pain has decreased. You might feel that calmer sensation. perhaps more calm, cool, collected, and more effective in your life. But Fonda, of course, we spoke before this call that we're going to also discuss cannabis in relation, since we're, of course, doing the breathwork now, of course, using cannabis in conjunction with this breath work so that we can access mindful levels of consciousness as well. We're touching upon a bit of a spiritual element where it can be a bit of a meditative aid as well. Since we're in this nice state after this breathing, can you talk about the spiritual aspects of how cannabis can help? And of course, I'm quite well aware that in the Indian cultures, of course, bang and cannabis is used ceremoniously as well as a meditative tool. Can you just share some insights about that, and perhaps something that could be taken away from people listening to this call that they can experiment with, that they can, if they're already using cannabis, how can they incorporate that into either the meditative practices, or if they're not doing any spiritual practices whatsoever, just something that can give them a taste for it?
Well, I can only talk about like the layering part of it, which I really connect with. So if somebody is in pain, which a lot of people are, and they take cannabis for their medication, right? Having that release where they're not in pain allows them to get into the breath. And being in the breath allows you to get to your higher self. And I'm not going to talk about religion, but God is a pretty universal word. So whoever your God is, you can get closer connected with that source. And how we get connected to that source on a spiritual level is we be that, because we are that, and that is in us. So we are, and so God is us. So once we get to that level, we kind of break down all the layers. So we take away the ego, we take away the pain, we take away those things that are all around us, and what we're left is a vibratory energy force. And so that vibratory energy force, when you're in that state, you close your eyes, you go in, and for me, I can actually feel the vibration going up and down my body, and I can extend that out to be around me, which we call our aura, right? So once you can feel that, which does take time. I mean, gosh, I've been practicing yoga for years. It takes time to peel away all of that. But once you get there, you get a sense of peace and okayness with any situation you're in. I had a situation where I was working with a young lady who was diagnosed with cancer, and she died in 8 days. Okay, so wow. 42 years old, 2 kids, the youngest child 6 years old. Had to walk her through that. And the anxiety around dying was, oh my God, like so intense. And yes, the doctors were giving her anxiety medications. She didn't have cannabis, but getting her to surrender, really, and be okay, and know that even without your physical form, you're okay. We get so attached to our physical being that we forget where we come from. So once you get into the breath and you're doing breath work, you realize that who you are in your physical form is such a small part of a whole totality out there. So what I would say to all listeners is, right, it's use cannabis, one, responsibly, right? Use it safely. Make sure that you're ingesting and using good quality medication. But not only use it for your pain, but use it to get to a deeper consciousness within yourself that's going to make you deeper rooted and connected to your God, whoever that is, because you'll feel so much better and you'll transcend that and you'll be more open and you'll pay everything forward, right? And if we're really living our dharma, which is our role in society, then everything's going to flourish. So even if you're going to die at 42 or 28 or 15 or 60, it doesn't matter, because you're still part of this universal energy that we have. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. At least for me, I'm sure that for some people this would be some interesting insights for them to at least ponder about. And for what it's worth, when you're medicated, or perhaps I'll just say when you're high, and of course I kind of like the double entendre of when you're high, because of course it also has other implications of higher consciousness, higher perspective.
Yeah, for sure, absolutely.
As well. And from a spiritual perspective, or perhaps we could even just say a reflective perspective, when you're medicated, when you're high, that's an excellent time to contemplate about these spiritual things. Of course, what you just said, Fonda, of course, people can re-listen to this part of the conversation and ponder the words that you just said and the implications of that. But of course, you can also, of course, reflect upon different aspects of your life. You can ask even what is the higher meaning and purpose of the illnesses that you might be experiencing. And it's actually surprising sometimes what kind of answers might actually surface to your mind when you're in that deeper level of consciousness, reflecting along these lines. And of course, cannabis, Bob Marley has a famous quote that when you smoke the herb, it reveals you to yourself. And I love that quote for a number of reasons, but it truly does have that effect that whatever you put your mind towards in this state of consciousness, because it elevates your creativity, which of course, using some more scientific jargon, smoking cannabis or ingesting it in various different ways, of course, augments the alpha and even the theta level brain waves, which, of course, you have access to deeper levels of your subconscious and superconscious aspects of your mind, where answers that are not necessarily obvious to you from a regular beta level mindset, where your day-to-day mindset, if you reflect upon the problems of your life, if you reflect upon questions that you may have, or what's going on in your life, or even your health and many other topics, even spiritually, from that perspective, of course, you don't need cannabis. Of course, you can train yourself to access these meditative consciousness by using various meditative practices. However, cannabis definitely is a wonderful entheogen. It's a wonderful tool to help access that level of creativity, those aspects of mind where interesting insights can surface. And I'm sure, Fonda, you probably would completely agree with that, or if anything I said that you could add to.
I definitely completely agree with that. I mean, my personal belief with cannabis is that it's absolutely wonderful at opening up the mind and unleashing that creativity within 100%. But with that said, use it mindfully, use it carefully, right? So if you're going to use it for that purpose, use it mindfully, right?
Yeah, and of course, and just a final thought before we move on from the subject. Of course, you mentioned that you practice yoga, and of course, in Indian cultures, like East Indian cultures, cannabis is used ceremoniously. It's used spiritually. It's actually recognized as a meditative
and it is used
tool
for meditation, for sure. Yeah, it's used for meditation.
Yeah, so of course, if you're interested in that kind of aspect of it, I'm sure you can Google around, or you could find some more information, and perhaps next year.
Yeah, I mean, one thing too that if there's patients who are interested, is doing like a ganja yoga, not where you're coming out and breaking out your pipes and stuff like that, but I'd like to kind of somehow connect patients who medicate with each other with different illnesses. So I don't know quite how I'm going to do that, whether it would be on video or I don't know, or to just find people local to Abbotsford and then do just different workshops, right? But where patients can feel safe. Like if I'm working with a group of MS patients from Ontario, for example, they can all come and feel safe to medicate and do a practice together and do a meditation together, because every illness also has a certain frequency. So it's, trying to understand that too, right?
Well, just based on what you just said, I'll just drop the name Louise Hay. People can also
oh my gosh, Louise Hay is so great. Yeah, she's so great.
So if what I just said and what Fonda just said sort of appeals to you, just Google Louise Hay, especially the book Heal Your Body. That's something that I'll just leave it hanging here at this point. If anybody wants it, they could just sort of Google it and discover more about that themselves. But now, just of course, thank you very much for touching about these mindfulness and spiritual aspects of cannabis. Now, talking about cannabis again, we talked about that. Of course, smoking it is just one way that people consume it, but of course, it's not necessarily the best way for people who are health conscious. Yoga practitioners might not want to be inhaling all the smoke, but now, of course, we briefly alluded to oils. We didn't really even discuss vaporizing at all. But back to the sort of the hat of being the founder of a medical clinic, Greenleaf Medical Clinic. How would you advise people to be consuming cannabis? So, of course, there's vaporizers, there's oils, and let's discuss how to produce those oils if they were to do so. If they're legal users. I want to just, of course, be emphasizing here that any text or information that's being provided is, of course, intended for legal use. So just putting that out there. So, Fonda, any? Of course, you.
Yeah, So I'll just touch base on the cannabis oil that I make.
Yes.
Because we're kind of running out of time here, but. So what I do is I just buy organic olive oil. When I'm using cannabis, I try not to ingest it with a lot of baking just because of the sugar content, because we all don't want to get diabetes. So I really try to watch the sugar content. So I'll just take, say, a few cups of olive oil, and I have a crock pot, and I'll let it sit in my garage with cannabis. So whatever strain I want to have. So like, let's just say, because I am a professional and I have to work, I can't take the chance of taking an indica, which is a downer, and have me fall asleep at my desk. So I will use a sativa in the daytime and then an indica at night. So even most times I don't have to medicate in the day, but if I'm doing like a lot of computer work, for example, I will feel the nerve sensations in my arm and my wrist will start hurting. So the sativa oil that I do, I let it sit in the crock pot. And the strain that I use is Love Potion, which is a really good sativa. And I'll let it sit in the crock pot.
Can you just mention the breeder, or where can they get seeds from?
It actually, I don't know where you can get seeds, because I used to work with Charles Scott, and I don't work with him anymore, but my grower got the genetics somehow, and so, so I just use Love Potion.
It's a sativa dominant strain, in other words. So
it's a sativa dominant. Yeah, and it's really good. And so what I do is I'll let it just simmer in the crock pot, and I'll leave it for like a day and a half to 2 days. And when I go to bed at night, I'll go turn it off. I'll just stir it around, because you really want to release all the compounds in the cannabis. And then I'll strain it and put it in a jar. And when I'm ready, when I first started it, I would start with like a quarter of a teaspoon under my tongue, wait like 20 minutes to half an hour. And if I needed more, then I would take a little bit more. And that's really easy for me. And then I just put it in a jar and I put it in the fridge, just keep it cool. And then for the nighttime, I have an indica dominant, which is Romulan, and I use that one. And so it's pretty simple. I do the same thing. And then sometimes I'll vaporize. Like if I'm going out of town or I'm on a business conference or whatever, I do have a vaporizer.
What's your favorite vaporizers? What kind of vaporizers do you prefer?
I have the Da Vinci, actually. It's small, it's compact, it's battery, it's not big and bulky, it slips in my suitcase, I can have it in my purse. They're actually coming out with a sleeker model, which isn't out yet. But yeah, it's a Da Vinci. And I have a nice green one, so...
Now, regarding the oils, just so that it's clear for people's minds, so of course you have a crock pot, and of course you're leaving it for a couple of days. I just want to mention that, of course, the heating process, just by being in the
very, very low, very, very low.
It also decarboxylates it. Of course, there's going to be an article at the summit, so you can learn more about decarboxylation and understand that process as well. But of course, that happens in the crock pot. Now, so just so that people are clear, so you take the buds, you put water and the organic olive oil into the crock pot, and you just let that all mix together for a couple of days at the low temperature. The cannabinoids infuse into the olive oil, which later on you strain out, and you separate the oil and the water. And just also make it easy for people. Of course, oil and water separate once you've strained it out, so so that's how you would separate the water. And with olive oil, you can also freeze the water, and it's easier to separate the two of them that way after the two layers have separated. Just putting that information out there for the listeners, just so that they have an understanding of the process. Is there anything else that you would add to that, or anything that I mentioned that would be inaccurate?
Well, and I'm also big on juicing too. So like I'll juice like fruits and vegetables. And what I'll do too is I'll add like a teaspoon of the oil to like a liter of juice and just sip it throughout the day. Where you don't even feel the THC, but it just keeps your muscle spasms at bay, right?
Mm-hmm. And what do you use? Something like a champion juicer for the juicing purposes?
No, I use a Breville, Breville.
Is
and
that
so
a
I don't
type,
have
or?
the pulp.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just like a food processor. Yeah, it's a Breville. So mine takes most of the fiber out because fiber holds a lot of nutrients. So a lot of nutrients are actually stored in the fiber. So my juice is actually taken completely out of the fiber. So there's no fiber in the juice whatsoever.
Okay, that's fantastic. So essentially, of course, there's the juicing aspect. There's, of course, the oils, and of course, you've also mentioned that there's sativa and the indica strain. So, of course, you use the sativa during the daytime. The indica is better for the evening and nighttime to help you to get to sleep. And of course, it also has the anti-inflammatory properties and a lot of pain relieving as well. So of course, we talked about the various different ways to medicate. We touched upon those things here. Now. We've also done the spirituality. I guess at this point, why don't we just quickly delve into now we've already touched upon the MMAR and the MMPR stuff a little bit earlier in the call, and of course we mentioned that specifically any Canadians who are looking to get legal access to go to the website such as medicalmarijuana.ca or Greenleaf MC, which is for greenleafmedicalclinic.ca, and of course you can get information on how to access these programs there. But I also wanted to ask you, Fonda, do you have any impressions about the new MMPR? Because of course you're now very much involved with this industry. You're talking to Health Canada, as you mentioned as well. So you got your finger on the pulse of directly what's happening in Canada with all these changes, and there's a lot of confusion people have. What's going on? What's your thoughts about the MMPR? Of course, a lot of people are infuriated about the fact that their growing rights are being revoked. Where do you see this heading? Do you think that this is going to pass? And what are the pros and cons of everything that's happening with these changes? And when is this likely to actually take effect?
Well, so with the documentation that's out there that Health Canada put out in December, their timeline was March 31st, 2014. However, yesterday we got a license in because as a medical clinic, the doctor gets a copy of the patient license as well as the patient. And so the license doesn't expire till April 2014. So that gives me some insight into assuming that Health Canada is going to extend the program past March 31st.
Okay.
So I also contacted the patient who also grows his own medication, and there was no letter in the package saying that Health Canada may terminate his production license as of March 31st, 2014. So that tells me that the March 31st, 2014 timeline may have been a little aggressive for Health Canada, which is a good thing because it allows the licensed commercial producers time to really think about that and assess the market and stuff too, right? So I think that Health Canada definitely needs to go to a different system because there also is a lot of safety issues, and there is the criminal element going on in the marketplace. I live in Abbotsford, BC, and it's very prominent out there where where there are people growing in small subdivisions, and they haven't even taken into consideration the smell that the plant is giving off. And I guess that's kind of Health Canada's fault in a way too, because Health Canada hasn't been out doing their inspections like they should be doing. So if there was a more controlled growing system that Health Canada had in place, then the chances are pretty high that the designated growers would be more accountable to their communities. But right now what's happening is I don't see a lot of accountability for designated growers with their community, and that is a concern. That's a concern for parents with children living in these small areas. It's a concern for safety. Where I live in Langley, BC, and, just a few weeks ago, a gentleman was found in his house dead because somebody killed him to cultivate his crop, and he was a licensed medical marijuana facility. So there's a safety issue for the designated grower. Plus, there's also the safety issue for the patient, too, because if a patient has a designated grower, there hasn't been strict guidelines or protocols for that medication being tested. So somebody who has autoimmune disorders, for example, where their immune system is already compromised given their medical situation, if they're ingesting cannabis with mold spores, for example, that can actually cause them more harm than good. So I definitely think that something has to be done on the testing front. Also with new patients who have never medicated with cannabis, with some of the strains being so powerful out there should be labels as to what they are getting, right? So what is the THC content? How is it going to affect me? There are patients who don't want a lot of THC, but they want the anti-inflammatories from the other properties. So that's also a concern. Then from the growing side, it's fires, right? Like a lot of these facilities, they're not even up to code. One of the things that I also do is I will do consulting with growers. So if growers are having an issue and they're growing their medication, but they're getting powdery mildew, I'll go in and I'll do an assessment and I'll try to help them. Like, this is what has to be done. And, usually it's a case where their temperature and humidity levels are too variant, right? So it's just working with them and even getting them to understand that. But a lot of growers they're just growing their medication, not really paying attention to what the patient needs are. So Health Canada has to change the current program. Do I agree that it should be taken away from patients who are growing their own? No, I don't. And the reason why is because it is expensive. A lot of patients can't afford it. And also some of the patients that I work with, they're on disability, and it actually gives them a hobby. It gives them something to do, because if we're just sitting at home and we're being inactive, a lot of times what happens is depression sets in, because people want to be contributing to society or at least helping themselves. So somebody who is able to grow at home, that kind of gives them a bit of feeling like, I'm okay, I'm contributing, I'm helping myself. It boosts their spirit up. So I think that's great. I think
there's a lot of therapeutic. Sorry,
yeah, totally. There's
just
a lot
from
of
growing, even growing tomatoes, right? There's a lot of therapeutics just to being a gardener, like gardening cannabis, but gardening of any sort. There's a lot of benefits for people as well.
And also, I talk a lot about energy, but food grown with love tastes a lot better. So if you're growing your own cannabis plants and you know that that's going for you, chances are you're putting more love and care into that. So energetically, that plant's going to be better for you, right? So, and then also you can match your strains more specific to what it is you're needing. And some patients don't require one or two strains. Some patients require 3 or 4 different strains. So that is a nice benefit of also a patient being able to have their own garden, because they can have multiple varieties of medication for themselves. But should they be allowed to grow in communities with neighbors? No, absolutely not. I think that they need to be on farms. I think that there needs to be a restriction as to their plot size, their land size. There has to be regulations. There also should be something said about pest control, right? There's a lot of gardeners out there who are using products on this food crop that are for ornamentals, that aren't meant for ingestion.
So the medicine is actually poisonous in that case.
Absolutely. 100%. And that's where things should be tested. So I think that if there were certain patients who met a certain criteria, who had a certain size property, that they should be able to grow X number of plants. And then the other side, the designated growers growing for patients, I think that should be terminated, and I think that it should go to commercial producers. That doesn't necessarily mean that those licensed commercial producers have to be large commercial facilities, and that's where sometimes I think that the terminology gets mixed up, because people hear licensed commercial producer and they automatically think large commercial farm. Well, they don't have to be large. Right?
Well, just since we're talking about the large commercial farms, can you, of course, share your opinions on what was going on a few months ago? Health Canada was proposing the idea of having these underground mining facilities, farming the cannabis way underground. So, of course, it's obviously security. It's kind of hard to rob an underground mine, but of course, I think that might be overkill in that sense. What's your perspective on what Health Canada was thinking about doing there?
But Health Canada already did that with Prairie Plant Systems in Flin Flon, Manitoba. And that was when Prairie Plant Systems first took on the contract for Health Canada. It was being grown in a mine. It's not being grown in a mine anymore. So I think growing in a mine, there is some issues with air quality and ground quality and stuff as well, right? But what Health Canada was doing with Prairie Plant Systems was they had growing chambers underground, so everything was being done within each growing chamber. So, and air quality and everything was completely controlled. So I haven't heard anything new about them wanting to go in mines. I know that Prairie Plant System years ago was growing in a mine in Flin Flon, Manitoba, but they are not anymore. So.
Well, perhaps that's a good thing. Hopefully, they'll at least
but I do agree with
a greenhouse because, of course, sunlight. From greenhouse the greenhouse gases emissions. We don't need to be utilizing artificial lighting if we can be doing it in a greenhouse. But of course, I hear what you're saying. So of course, rather than having it people growing in their own homes or on a community level, you're suggesting that there be either community grow farms or small organizations that are actually doing the growing.
Or even if they're large organizations, like it doesn't matter. I just really wanted to clear up that having a licensed commercial facility, anybody can apply to have a licensed commercial facility. So if there's small growers out there who really think that they can make a difference, they should absolutely apply to have a commercial facility. There will be guidelines with where they can do it and probably space and indoor-outdoor restrictions. I know that Health Canada is not going to allow any outdoor for sure. It will be indoor, and it will not be allowed in a dwelling, which I agree with. So it will not be allowed in somebody's home anymore. And I think that's great, because you're home, you have company coming, you have people coming. You don't see other narcotics companies having their medication being manufactured in their house. Right, so I definitely agree with that. So, and the licensed commercial facilities, I think that those are a good thing, because there needs to be more research done into cannabis. Cannabis should be researched. There should be better products available to patients as well, right? So I definitely agree with patients growing their own, but I also agree with the licensed commercial facilities.
Okay.
So hopefully Health Canada will find a medium to that.
Before we, there's a couple of topics here I want to, of course, get into with with the discussion of all this growing. Of course, there's the topic of fertilizers, and I know that you have a company that provides that as well. So I want to touch upon that. But before we go there, I just want one last question here regarding the services that you offer for Canadians. We've already discussed that earlier. Now, of course, we mentioned that that's for the MMAR, but of course, Canadians are now aware that we're transitioning to the MMPR. So with the new regulations, I'm sure you've already analyzed them extensively. Once that takes effect, can people still contact you to help them with the process of getting their MMPRs done?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. The only uncertainty is for us from a clinic standpoint is we're not clear if we'll still be able to do Skype appointments. So we're not sure about that yet. We do have a memo into Health Canada asking that specific question, and we haven't heard back yet. So, yeah, most definitely. Yeah, we're definitely going to do that for sure.
I'm sure that by the time it rolls around to the transition time that you'll have this all figured out and people will...
we'll have more information for sure.
Okay, that's fantastic. And, of course, I'm sure that Health Canada will figure out some way that you'll be able to continue providing your services to help Canadians to access this system, which has been so difficult to get access into. But now, regarding the fertilizers, now one quick question is: are you providing this company exclusively? Is it just fertilizers for Canadians, or is this are these products accessible worldwide? What's your market?
They're accessible worldwide. How we started out with the fertilizer is when I got involved with medicalmarijuana.ca, they were working with Charles Scott, known as Reefer Man. So he had originally come up with a formulation that he had developed when he had worked with a company called GW Pharmaceuticals, which is big in the marijuana industry. And so when he worked with GW Pharmaceuticals, though, the formulation was in a powdered form. So when I came on board, my task was working with Charles Scott, a.k.a. Reefer Man, to take this formulation and put it into a liquid form. And because I have experience in the manufacturing of products, they thought that that would be a good fit for me to work with him. So needless to say, him and I started on this journey together. And what I found was that his formulation was rather incomplete. So after running like several batches and trial and error, we had to totally revamp the formulation. So the product you have today has been predominantly developed by myself with a couple of scientific people that I've kind of known in the industry from my GrowTech manufacturing days. So it's a 1-part grow and a 1-part bloom with calcium added separately. And the reason why we had to take the calcium out of the product is because our product is so concentrated that phosphates and calcium are incompatible at high concentrations. So when we had originally had the calcium mixed in the super strength formulation, the calcium was falling out of it. So we separated it out because we want growers to have access to a 1-part product. Because I was involved on the manufacturing side of things for several years, and I understand plant physiology, you don't need to have 10 different products to grow a cannabis plant. More is not necessarily better. So if you work on your growing medium and you have your additives for that, that's one part of it. But your fertilizer component actually should be quite simple. So the formulation that we have, it is not 100% organic. It is organic-based, which means that the majority of the products going in there are organic-based, but it still does have a component of being synthetic. Okay. We also make sure that the product is completely flushed, so there is no leftover fertilizer in the product. We've actually had it tested, and it works really well. Our next phase would be to come up with 100% organic, because there are growers who only want to have organic product and patients who only want to ingest organic medication. So that would be phase 2. So we only have 3 products. We have a Grow, we have a Bloom, and we have a Cow Boost. And the name that we chose is Love Potion.
Now, just out of curiosity, is this intended for hydroponic systems, or is this intended for soil, or can it be used for both?
You can do it in soil, you can do it in hydroponics, you can do it in deep water, you can do it in aeroponics, you can do it in cocoa. So it's not specific to one application. It's a very grassroots company right now, just because I really take time to work with growers who use it. And so we're just really connected with the product. So it's not mass marketed. We don't have a huge customer base per se if you were to go retail for it, because one of the issues is because I had a wholesale garden supply company, and I was also involved in the retail market. I had originally gone to the retail stores to sell the product. And because the original formulation developed by Charles wasn't of the greatest quality, there were retail stores who kind of lost credibility in the product. So then we had to revamp it. Charles is no longer with the company. I kind of took over the whole R&D and the manufacturing part of it, and have repositioned it. But the other issue is, because Maple Reef sells direct to growers, and we sell wholesale and we sell retail, a lot of the retail stores won't support it because they have their brands already. They don't want to have a competing product to General Hydroponics, for example, that has been around for years. Even though I'm so intimate with that product because I was the major distributor in Canada through Alley's Wholesale with that product, so I know that the General Hydroponics, the original formulation, is a 3-part formula, but it's still the 1960s formulation that was never really developed for cannabis plants that I know of, right? So these retail stores have their certain alliances and don't want to bring in new retail products. So it kind of made it a bit of a challenge. So we've kind of kept it homey and grassroots, and we do our sales as they come. So, and it's really word of mouth, which has been really cool.
So how can people get your product? What's your website address?
It's just maplereef.com. So www.maplereef.com. Maplereef.com. REEF. Yeah, .com.
.com. Fantastic.
Yeah, so keep posted on that. But geez, we totally went over our time, hey?
Yes, actually, we have. So we're pretty much at the end of it. So of course, just was going to actually do a wrap up here. And so first of all, thank you very much, Fonda, for speaking with us today. You shared a lot of great information. Just to quickly recap, of course, we've talked about a number of different things about, of course, understanding about your medical clinic, how you can provide the services that you do at the very reasonable cost that you provide them for Canadians to have access to the medical system that is so challenging for a lot of Canadians to access. Of course, we talked about a couple of different points throughout the call about how to use cannabis for various different physical ailments, and particularly we focused on chronic pain. And, of course, we even touched upon the spiritual aspects of cannabis, using it for mindfulness purposes. But, of course, one of the delightful things that you've contributed to the summit is, of course, talking about the breath work, of course, realizing that not just related to cannabis, but, of course, how we can, of course, breathe and feel better with our physical pains and anxiety and other issues that a lot of us who are on medical cannabis may be experiencing, the needs for the benefits of actually being reminded of deep breathing. Actually, this I'm sure is practical wisdom that can be shared with everybody. And, of course, talking about Maple Reef as well. So I'm going to be definitely looking into that product as well. Unfortunately, I'm not growing at this time, but eventually I will be, or at least I hope to be someday for personal use, of course. And anyhow, so, of course, those of you who are growing, definitely look at Maple Reef. And those of you who would like to find out more about Fonda, of course, you can go to Greenleaf Medical Clinic, which is either at medicalmarijuana.ca or greenleafmc.ca. And so, Fonda, thank you so very much again for taking the time to speak with us today. And do you have any sort of parting words or final tidbits that you'd like to share with us today?
Yeah, I think we covered a fair amount of ground. So, yeah, if anybody has any questions or they want to connect, feel free to call us. We do have a toll-free number, and I always make myself available to patients as well. So our toll-free number is 1-877-513-4769. So, yeah, definitely give us a call, and, be willing to answer any questions that we can.
Fantastic.
And also, I should do a Facebook plug. Follow us on Facebook, Medical Marijuana. Follow us on Facebook. So I think we're at like 900 and some likes. We're trying to hit the 1,000 mark for likes. So if you're the 1,000th patient, we will give you a doctor consultation for free. How's that?
Hey, excellent. You heard it here, folks. So try to get to be that magic number 1,000. And, of course, if you've been looking to get a doctor consultation, definitely this is the right place. I've of course, just for what it's worth, I've resisted it myself. I went to the do-it-yourself route, going to doctors, and so now personally I've come to medical to Greenleaf Medical Clinic myself. I'm of course facing another roadblock because perhaps just really quickly, it turns out perhaps this is something. Sorry, I know this is the end, but let's just add this because of course this might be relevant for a lot of the patients as well. Be careful of what doctors you're using for getting the specialist forms, because as I've personally found out, not all are registered with a Canadian medical. Well, Fonda, you actually understand my personal problem. Can you explain that? How that's
what happened
as well?
Yeah, for sure. So what happened in Bobby's situation is he's a Category 2 for his medical condition. So with Health Canada, there's Category 1 and there's a Category 2. So with the Category 1, we do not have to specify on the Health Canada form the name of the specialist that the patient consulted to have his condition verified. So with the Category 2s, as was Bobby's case, we do. So Bobby thought that he was going to a specialist pertaining to his medical condition. However, when we got his medical records, even though the specialist was claiming to be a specialist in his name title, we found out that he was actually not a specialist. So Health Canada has a requirement that to be a licensed specialist in Canada, you have to be a member of the Royal College of Physicians. So a good test to check to make sure that your doctor is a specialist is to go on to the Royal College of Physicians website, and you can actually type in your doctor's name, and it will come up there as to whether or not he or she is a specialist. Because there have been several instances in our clinic specifically where doctors have claimed to be a specialist, and they are not registered in Canada as a specialist. They may have their specialty education outside of Canada, but that still does not qualify them to be a specialist in Canada. So that's just, a few words of wisdom there. Definitely check to make sure that your specialist is actually a specialist.
Yeah, I was already doing my my happy dance, thinking finally I'm going to get legal and have all the stresses associated with this gone. Unfortunately, I actually had to quit cannabis because of my public stance on this issue with this whole summit. I actually had to quit cannabis just to ensure that I'm not going to get arrested and get the summit shut down. But to make a long story short, of course, it takes months to get these specialist appointments and stuff like that. So I went through the process. Got the paperwork, totally disappointed to find out that the piece of paper that I got was actually worthless because the doctor's not an actual specialist. So the point of the matter is this, for those of you who are going through this process, make sure in advance that the appointment that you're waiting for months to get is with a qualified specialist. So talk to Fonda or one of the other fine staff at Medical Marijuana or the Greenleaf Medical Clinic to make sure that the doctor that you're going to be dealing with is actually an appropriate doctor. If not, don't waste your time. Just cancel the appointment and get a proper appointment with someone else, because it just delays you months and months, and I'm personally disappointed with this situation. But anyhow, that's not anything to do with Fonda, but thanks for adding this little tidbit of information. I think will be a value to some of the listeners today, so they don't get caught up in the same problem that has delayed me quite a few months as well. And anyhow, once again, thank you so very much, Fonda, for doing this call, and I hope that a lot of the listeners who listen to this will get a lot of value from the numerous things that we've actually discussed here today.